Welcome to week 5 of our lecture series on theoretical perspectives and key ideas. I think I have to come out and say that this is my favorite week of all, because this is the week in which we look at the concept of structure, and particularly the concept or the theoretical current that has come to be known as structuralism, which is most of all perhaps in anthropology associated with the name of Claude Lévi-Strauss, the possibly most famous and greatest anthropologist of all time, some would say, French anthropologist, about whom we'll be talking about in today's clips a fair deal. I just wanted to start, as I do every week, by putting my own cards on the table and saying a little bit about what I think about the topic that we're talking about in this week. And I have to say, I'm a complete Lévi-Strauss fan. I always have been from the first time I read his work. I thought, when you have this kind of moment of recognition when you read a book and you say, my God, these are thoughts that I've been kind of thinking all along myself in some way, but they're reflected so much better in the writing of this amazing author that I've just found. I don't know if any of you have had that sensation or experience any time. I hope you have, because it's a really amazing kind of thing. When it happens, it's really exciting. And I've had it with a few authors, and in anthropology, I think Lévi-Strauss is the one that I've had it with most and first as a student, roughly in the position that you're in today. And I think if I had to kind of verbalize what happened there, I think the excitement comes down to something like this. As we'll see this week, structuralism in many ways has lots of technicalities associated with it. In some ways, Lévi-Strauss's theory is underpinned by a whole kind of theorization of how symbols and signs work. There's a kind of technical jargon that goes with that. There's a theory of how the brain even works. All of that I'm not that interested in. It's fine, Lévi-Strauss, like everyone else, had his theories and so on. But what I really find exciting in reading Lévi-Strauss and in the approaches that I take to be structuralist and indeed post-structuralist, and we'll talk a little bit about that too today, is this fundamental idea that underlying the surface that we see around us, the kind of cultural and social life as we experience it, either in our own daily life or as anthropologists when we're doing fieldwork or reading about it in other people's books about their own experiences and so on, underlying all that are certain kind of struggles with really, really big conceptual fundamental issues. That a myth that you might find in Greece, where I come from, a folk story, or the way that people organize who they can and who they can't marry in Australia, or the political organization that particular people in Siberia might be involved in. All of these surface phenomena are underpinned and are struggles with big concepts. The difference between the male and the female, or how to deal with the continuity of nature through the discontinuous categories of culture, or how the movement of a particular body is to be reconciled with inertia and stasis. These kinds of big themes that in the kind of tradition of thought that I grew up with coming from Europe, the kind of Occidental tradition of thinking, are most associated with philosophy, with mathematics, with some forms of natural science. These kinds of themes, suddenly, through the work of Lévi-Strauss and structuralism, are dealt with in the surface of social and cultural life, in myths, in kinship, in politics, in rituals. And suddenly, as an anthropologist, if I take this approach, by investigating these deep structural, conceptual questions, I can participate in that long conversation that philosophers and scientists and thinkers have been conducting in libraries. I can do it out there in the world, right? I'll tell you a little story about actually how I was converted to become an anthropologist. My first degree was actually in philosophy, and I was particularly excited about ancient Greek philosophy as a 18, 19-year-old kid, maybe because I grew up in Greece. My mother is Greek. I don't know, I have a kind of adoration of ancient Greek philosophers, perhaps because it's in my blood in that sense. And one of the big issues in Greek philosophy, and in fact throughout the history of Western philosophy and many other forms of philosophy as well, is what the ancient Greeks used to discuss as the problem of the one and the many. So pre-Socratic philosophers used to dispute, and in some ways Plato and Aristotle are trying to respond to this question: is the world around us a single continuous thing? Is it all actually one? And the idea that there are differences between things is just merely an illusion. The pre-Socratic philosopher most associated with that position is Parmenides. Or is in fact the world an irreducible multiplicity, constantly in flux, right? So there's never one thing that you can hold on to that is stable, but the world is inherently manifold and many. And the most famous pre-Socratic philosopher, again, associated with that position, is Heraclitus, the guy who said you can never step in the same river twice. Everything is in motion, in flow, right? So that opposition between Parmenides and Heraclitus, I, as a 19-year-old or whatever I was, got really excited with, because I thought I could see that opposition playing itself out throughout the whole history of philosophy as I was reading. You know, the kind of thoughts that one has when one gets really excited intellectually, right? And then one day, the following thought occurred to me. For some reason, I'd got into going to casinos. Actually, I wasn't going to casinos. I was fantasizing about going to casinos because I wasn't allowed and I didn't have the money to go to casinos. But I had this idea that, I think I probably read Dostoevsky's The Gambler, and I had this romantic idea that one could take up gambling as a serious activity. And I remember thinking about that and thinking about the figure of the roulette. And it suddenly dawned on me that the whole point of the roulette was an opposition between the continuous and the discontinuous. The one single movement of the ball, right? A single one continuous movement versus the digital distinctions between the different slots into which the ball can fall in a roulette, from 1 to 36 plus 0 plus double 0 if you're in a particularly mean kind of roulette owner or casino, to reduce the odds of winning. And that basically gamblers sitting around the roulette are staking their own money on the kind of incommensurability between the continuous motion of the ball and the discontinuous slots into which that ball might fall. So I saw in that kind of moment the continuous movement of the ball as the Parmenides position and the discontinuous slot as the Heraclitus position, the many position, the one and the many. And the kind of irreconcilable tension between those two resolves itself in that moment when the ball hits one number and not the others, and some gamblers win and the rest lose, right? And it struck me that this was a part of social life in which these big philosophical questions were at stake in the surface, so much at stake, literally, that people were staking their hard-earned money on them, or not so hard-earned if they were criminals, perhaps, I don't know. So that's a fundamentally exciting thought to me, that the surface of social life might be connected in that way to deep, big philosophical questions. And that, I think, Lévi-Strauss and structuralism kind of really goes to town with that thought. Lévi-Strauss's writing is replete with these kinds of investigations into the deeper conceptual stakes of phenomena that might on the surface seem trivial, and that makes it really exciting for me. I'll say some things that are more critical towards the end of this lecture, but I thought I'd kick you off with a sense of my own excitement with the topic that we're about to look at this week. So see you in clip 2, as usual.